3D movies were everywhere in the 2010s. From titles like Final Destination, which hasn't aged well with its CGI 3D take, to bigger franchises like Star Wars under films like The Force Awakens. 3D just seemed to be like the future for us millennials. And even as I record this video, the 2025 release of Superman can be seen in 3D, which is really interesting. It felt like you could see just about any movie in 3D, and it would usually come with a little higher cost, giving the audience a different experience. But not every movie would be suited for 3D, even though in the 2010s, literally the majority of releases had a 3D option. Usually the 3D experience wasn't that noticeable for this fact, and they would have terrible CGI in certain parts of the film that would indeed pop out of the screen, but didn't necessarily outweigh the extra costs. Usually 3D was like lettering or somebody pointing at something in the movie, and from my experience with 3D, the glasses would hurt my head over time. Whenever I would take them off for a second, the film would be in edits of RGB overlays, making it even more difficult to watch, which had me turn away from 3D altogether. Would my experience be similar to others? And would this cause 3D to be phased out in the 2020s? Or would history repeating itself in the industry cause audiences to seek out more enjoyable experiences? 3D films have always been a part of the industry, usually coming back in some form or another. Spy Kids 3 Game Over had a 3D adaptation in 2003 that didn't have the best experience. But it wasn't until the success of Avatar in 2009, which follows an out-of-this-world experience, where 3D really made an impression in the industry, mainly because the film made billions. But keep in mind, Avatar wasn't the first of its kind to have 3D. Like I stated, it has been in the industry in some form or another, but the first 3D experience dates back to the mid-18 and early 1900s. This was due to the multiple inventors and patents behind photographic technology of the time. You could even say this wasn't just photographs, as the push for the next leading innovation within technology created how we record moving images and how we access sound or sound waves, which gave way to 3D TVs. The history behind 3D is very fascinating, and I won't go that in depth within my video, but it wasn't until the mid 1900s where you started to see films really use the technology behind 3D. Usually these films were more sci-fi and horror based, and it was seen just as a gimmick, which caused the industry to drop 3D until the 1980s, where it would come back at drive-ins still under more horror focused titles like hit slasher franchise Friday the 13th. Audiences still saw 3D as a more expensive gimmick, and it wasn't until the 2010s where 3D would take the industry into a new experience. Just about every film after the 2010s had the option of a 3D experience. You want to see Justin Bieber's Never Say Never in 3D? Well, here's your chance of seeing him up close and personal, but not that personal. While it was overwhelming on which experience would be better, 3D or normal viewing, the success of 3D and why the industry chose to use it within every film of the 2010s was thanks to James Cameron and his hit movie Avatar that released the prior year. This movie would bring in billions because of its jaw-dropping 3D experience, and as a 12-year-old of the time, watching this on the big screen in 3D happening real time made my brain crave more. This craving would go on to push the industry into a new direction, and not only changed how the audience viewed a movie, but also the everlasting impressions. Avatar is still talked about as a leader in 3D, and even the second film, though not as successful, still left a mark on what 3D should be for audiences. This type of revenue that 3D would bring in caused an uprising, and you could now have franchises like Resident Evil in 3D. The industry would no longer see 3D as a toy, but more so as the next leading innovation, as it would push new waves in household technology like 3D TVs and 3D Blu-ray players. Hell, even PlayStation and Xbox would have 3D in some way, if anyone remembers. 3D's success would be short-lived, however, and by the 2020s, it would be phased out, no longer giving audiences a different way to view. After the 2020s, more and more films dropped the 3D option as an experience. Now, for anyone who lived in the 2020s, there was a pandemic that happened and streaming became the norm for most audiences. However, that did not play a crucial role in 3D's downfall. Around 2017, you started to see a decline in 3D viewing, and this was due to the poor experiences. Most 3D movies of the 2010s felt cheesy, and you had to just pay more for that experience, which sucked. Not to mention numerous complaints about the glasses, and they would either cause disorientation or pain because they were cheaply produced pieces of plastic. And when you took off the glasses to get more comfort, the movie was harder to watch because of its RGB overlays. In the mid-2010s, it just became a cash grab because a lot of these films were either gimmicky with their 3D effects, or the film itself was not really suited for 3D. Star Wars falls victim to this poor experience. Most of the films also used cost-cutting measures to give us 3D, and it caused the audience to suffer. 3D can be pretty costly if done right, and taken into consideration on how much Avatar was to produce, it was no wonder why it was a success, and most 3D movies of the 2010s did not have the same outlook. People who lived through the 3D experience of the 1980s would also make the same comparison from the past to the present. This would cause the industry to make another shift, using less 3D to gain audiences' trust again. Even though 3D has been a gimmick for the majority of its lifespan, that kid in me still wants to experience a 3D movie without cheesy effects and painful freaking glasses. Similar to what you find in Blade Runner 2049, the holographic technology we have today would be interesting to experience in movie form. But that in itself would be costly to produce in this time period. Maybe in the future, that type of 3D experience will happen. I mean, it's seen in a lot of sci-fi movies of the 2000s and 2010s. What do you think about 3D? Do you want it to be more involved with the audience, or do you want to have a normal viewing experience? 3D has had its ups and downs, but I can see that the technology is right at our fingertips.